Okay, I've got 10 o'clock and I've started a recording of the webinar. Hopefully, if the recording is successful, we'll be able to provide a link to everyone who registered after the webinar. But if the recording's not successful, you have the benefit of actually being here live with us, and we're glad to have you. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we are very pleased this morning to have Amelia Mansfield with us, who works for Burton Planning, and she is our instructor on many of our Active Transportation Academy courses, including the Conducting Walk and Bike Audits course. And she is going to give you an overview of that course this morning. Amelia, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Great. If you can just make sure you're nice and close to the microphone, that would be great.
Yes. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Victoria, for the welcome. I'm happy to be here today to share a bit about the Active Transportation Academy in general, and then to give you some tantalizing insight into what our conducting walk and bike audits for our course entails, so that hopefully you get together a group of people from your community and have us come out and spend half of a day with you learning how to organize and conduct audits. So today, like I said, we're going to briefly go over what the Active Transportation Academy is. We will share what the full course learning outcomes for the Walk and Bike Audits course is. That way you understand what it is we would be expecting you to walk away with when you host one in your community. And the topics we're going to highlight are the benefits and challenges of walking and biking. I'm sure you're well aware of what many of these are, but again, the people that you invite to be a part of the course in your community may not be aware. So it's helpful for you to get an understanding of what we would share with them. We'll also highlight the purpose and type of walk and bike audits, and then exactly how you would go about conducting one. Okay, so the Active Transportation Academy is here to offer training to help your communities reach your active transportation goals. As active transportation has become at the forefront of a lot of our planning activities and community questions about how to improve neighborhoods, it's absolutely something that ODOT and the Academy are interested in helping you work towards. So these are free trainings and workshops to communities all throughout Ohio, no matter how urban or rural, large or small. We are happy to come out and present and work with you, either for a half-day or full-day training. These trainings are open to any local jurisdiction, and so it's important to think about that a little bit outside the box. We're not just talking about cities and townships and counties and villages. We're also talking about other local jurisdictions and government entities, so schools, school districts, health departments, metro parks, parks districts, whoever might have a stake in active transportation planning and implementation. We offer professional development credits for the attendees, and I know this is often an incentive to get people to show up, so we make sure to promote that. And if you're interested in getting more information, you can navigate through the long web address below, or you can go to ODOT's homepage, to the planning subpage, to the LTAP sub-sub page, and then to the Active Transportation Academy. It also works if you Google ODOT LTAP ATA. So you may have been privy to the prior Safe Routes Academy. We have rebranded that in this past year to reflect a broader offering of courses. So the new courses that we have this year, which have been very popular, are Community Traffic Calming Programs, Conducting Walk and Bike Audits, Health and Equity in Transportation. And these three all focus on all the things that your communities might want to do in order to make sure that walking and biking is a safer and more equitable option, And oftentimes, different organizations and groups are urged to participate, understanding that it isn't just the responsibility of the engineering and planning departments, but it's a community effort. So everything from health officials to community advocates to school district representatives and citizens in general tend to participate. We also have Train the Trainer courses, and these are what would have been familiar to you if you had participated or poked around on the site when it was the Safe Routes Academy. So the walking school bus training, the crossing guard training, and conducting a school walk audit trainings are all trainings that were under that crux of Safe Routes to School and mostly involved our local school districts, and we had expected that they would invite planners and engineers and local decision makers. And then there's also the Girls in Gear training, a way to empower young women and female children to get out on their bikes and feel confident on the roadways and as pedestrians and active transportation advocates in training. So the other courses listed here, you can see there are quite a few, so there's something for everyone. How do you create Safe Routes to School lesson plans? Know that travel plan development is also a big driver in getting funding, and so a lot of communities and school districts say, you know, how do we do this? So we're here to help you learn how to do that. There's non-infrastructure implementation, so this focuses around programs that engage not only children as active transportation participants, but also all of the different decision makers that influence the way that their environment is built and the way that their extracurricular activities and day-to-day lives are programmed, and how the active transportation environment interacts with that. Then also incorporating Safe Routes to School into wellness, school and community policy and planning, and safety and active transportation, school and community planning. So there's something for everyone, and we're also happy to discuss combining two trainings in one day if there might be a teacher in service, for example, or if you have interested parties who might benefit from two of these courses, we can help make that happen in one day. So coming soon, we have 4 new courses. One of them is an on-demand online crossing guard training. We hope to have that up in the next month or two. Then we'll have Complete Streets implementation. So how do you actually create a Complete Streets policy, and then how do you put it into action? Advocating for active transportation. So this has to do with both grassroots, but also government-led equity, and making sure that as professionals in this field, we work with our local decision makers to advocate for active transportation options that are safe and efficient. And then a Vision Zero action plan. How do you create one? So hopefully these interest you, and we'll be hearing from you after this webinar that you want to sign up. And we'll get more information later in the program about how to do that. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking today about what we would actually go through during the Conducting Walk and Bike Audits course. So understanding that it is a 4-hour-long course, and I'm only going to be talking about it for about 25 minutes, I think that serves 2 purposes. One, it makes sure that when you actually participate in this, you aren't bored because you've heard it all before. But it also just gives you the top-level focus of what we would be doing. That way you would understand how it might fit into your community's needs and who you might want to engage in the actual course in your community. So the learning outcomes for the Conducting Walk and Bike Audits course, or I guess I just talked about this. We'll skip to the next slide. So the actual learning outcomes for the course itself are listed here. I'm not going to read them verbatim for you, but in general, you just want to make sure that everyone who's involved understands why they're in the room. Why are we talking about walking and biking and building safe and healthy communities? So we would talk a bit about the background, the history, the data. Understanding what kind of challenges there are to walking and biking. This might seem like stuff you already know, and you probably do. But when you're pulling in people who aren't in this field, and maybe who don't walk and bike on a day-to-day basis, they may just not be aware of exactly what kind of barriers and challenges are out there, especially to people in underserved communities or who might have disabilities. We would also be hoping that an outcome of this course, would be how exactly do we organize a walk and bike audit, and how do we then lead one in our community? So benefits of walking and biking. Of course, they run the spectrum here of everything from the categories of health, social factors, economic factors, and environmental factors, all the way across increasing physical activity, decreasing the reliance on automobiles, and improving our built environment. So first, reducing the risk of chronic disease and premature death. This is something that a lot of our health departments and a lot of you, I'm sure, are seeing in literature and even in the grants that you're writing and the funding that you're receiving, is how do we make sure that we reduce these chronic illnesses, especially those that have to do with inactivity. And how can we do that from a systemic approach? And this is a lot of times where our health professionals are interested in participating. Then there's less daily stress. So we all are frustrated behind the wheel of our cars as we sit in traffic congestion, and even though everyone who ever comes to Ohio from other places laughs at us and says, "What are you talking about? You don't have traffic congestion." It's all relative. And so whether or not we are stuck at a traffic light for 30 seconds longer than normal, or on the highway behind an accident for 10 minutes longer than normal, it's still frustrating and gets our stress rates higher, and it's just not good for us. Encouraging active commuting, again, that goes hand in hand. It might be stressful to be on the road with inclement weather or cars whizzing by, but in general, if we can change habits in that regard, maybe it'll be a little bit less onerous on our environment and on ourselves. There's those social aspects. So if there are more eyes on the street, more opportunity for interaction, you build that sense of community, and then people are out and active more often. They aren't necessarily relying on a gym membership to get that activity in. There's also this idea that has become a part of American society that roads are for cars and people don't belong on them. But that's not the case. They could be used for many other things. Think about a road in your community and the times of days that it's utilized by cars, and if you go out on at different times of days, there may not be much happening. And what's the purpose of the road then? We're all paying for it with our taxpayer dollars, whether or not we're driving on it, so why not use it for something engaging, like a festival or a place to have a Zumba class? Then we talk about other social factors in the built environment, like more access for low-income populations, the elderly, children, people with disabilities. Cars aren't necessarily the best way for all of those people to get where they need to go. So how do we improve our built environment to make sure that everyone can use it? Healthcare costs are at the forefront of a lot of conversations these days, and so increasing physical activity through our built environment can actually lower those healthcare costs, and that can be a real driving factor for some communities and business leaders to want to work together to make sure that our built environment is more conducive to walking and biking and transit use. Then there is the whole idea of how much money do we spend every month getting to and from work and the grocery store and dropping the kids off at school because we're driving in our cars. There's greater productivity to be had when we aren't in congestion. And so how do we decrease that reliance on automobiles and bring that economic factor into it? There's also the idea of increasing property values and greater tax revenue when you are diversifying the modes of transportation and allowing different people to be able to access things at different times of days and in different ways. There's a lot of studies out there about the number of repeat visits and the money that is spent with foot traffic versus car traffic. And so that's also an interesting thing to look at. Then there are all these environmental factors and benefits of walking and biking. So Again, back to physical activity, if a space is well designed and you want to be there, then you're more likely to walk there. There are emissions. Of course, a lot of our funding through the MPOs and RPOs are focused on vehicle emissions, and so improving walking and biking also can work towards those goals. And then the whole idea of land use and more compact development equals less stormwater runoff, less impermeable surface. And so if you have plans in your community that focus on the water factor, then this is also a way of working towards that. If you provide more walking and biking opportunities and less investment in expanding roadways that are only used for one purpose, then you may be able to meet that goal as well. So challenges to walking and biking. Again, these are things that I'm sure all of you are aware of, but in the course we want to talk a lot about this and get people talking as a group in the room about what kind of challenges exist in their community specifically. So a lot of the challenges do go across different types of communities, everything from rural to urban, but some of them are more specific to one type of community as compared to another. So we talk a lot about the width of roads and what does that mean? And when we have engineers in the room, that's always a great opportunity to talk about why do we have such wide roads? If we have our emergency responders in the room, that's also an opportunity to talk about the reason that roads are as wide as they are and what are the concerns and challenges of making them narrower to fit in things like multi-use paths or bike lanes. We talk a lot about land use again when it comes to setbacks and the length of blocks in your communities. So I've seen some numbers that have talked about how in suburban Ohio communities, sometimes the blocks in residential subdivisions are exponentially longer than what an average person would be willing to walk to get from point A to point B. And so that's interesting when it comes to thinking about challenges of walking and biking. You might have beautiful sidewalks, but how long do you have to walk on them to get to where you're going? The whole auto-oriented business perspective is also something that usually gets a lot of conversation in these courses. So how do we balance this status quo of driving to multiple places to get multiple things multiple times a day versus some people wanting to be able to walk and bike to where they're going, and then how do you balance those two together? And then again, separated land uses. So getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of how do we change the policies in our community to fit walking and biking and transit use as well as automobiles into the landscape. And so again, having a bunch of different backgrounds represented in the room usually leads to a lot of great conversation, and that's one of the benefits of these workshops is having that face-to-face interaction over a 4-hour period, and people start to understand each other better, and they start to come up with some solutions that I would never think of because I'm not a part of their community. We also talk a bit about history, and so something that's interesting is we get into talking about how our legal system favors motorists, what the history of the term jaywalking was, and the whole idea that, decades ago there was this action of the police officers ticketing pedestrians for crossing the street at unmarked crosswalks, even though in communities nowadays we know that in many communities it's legal to cross where there's an intersection even if it isn't legally marked. And so jaywalking became something that was instilled into everyone's mind as being the pedestrians' problem. And there were also some laws that were being proposed and even adopted across the nation to be able to not ticket cars who were coming within close proximity or even hitting protesters who were blocking intersections. And so it's just interesting to look at what the legal system says about all of this. And we talk a little bit about the Ohio Revised Code as well, and then look a little bit at your specific community's codes if they're available, and discuss items like this to be able to see how that policy influence affects walking and biking. We are making progress. I believe it was last year or the year before Ohio passed the 3-foot passing law, so things are changing, and I think that's also another reason to engage your community in this type of workshop to keep that moving forward. So we also talk about social and environmental factors when it comes to things like lighting and crime and vacant buildings. And I remember one of my favorite courses in city planning master's school was talking about eyes on the community, and the whole idea that if there is blight in your community, there's more likely going to be more crime. There's definitely more perception of that. So who's going to go out and walk around or bike around when trash is everywhere and weeds are overgrown, and especially in communities where people have no other option? That still poses a challenge. People might, ostensibly be missing work because they don't feel safe walking to the bus stop. And so how do we as a community work to change that? So then we talk about purpose of walk and bike audits. So maps can only tell us so much. Not everybody feels comfortable looking at a map anyway. And so what we can do through walk and bike audits is these 4 things listed here. So we like to talk about this from 2 perspectives, both from the technical professional's perspective, who's participating in the walk and bike audit, and also from the general public's perspective who are participating. So we can investigate what's going on in a community or a neighborhood. So both from the policy side of things, like we were talking before about laws and land use and codes and things like that. But we can also spend time talking with the community members about what their challenges are, what areas of their community they feel most comfortable in, and we can start to learn a lot that we wouldn't be able to learn from just looking at a map. This can also inspire change in a community and conversation in a community. We're able to educate both the professionals and the members of the public through the walk and bike audit. So what exactly is working in your community? Are there things that you hadn't noticed before that could be changed? Are there things that you hadn't noticed before that you might really enjoy now? And then how do we take all of this information and make a plan to improve the community so that we can walk and bike safely and more efficiently, and that more people in our community can do that? So I was remiss to mention that we talk about walk and bike audits both in this training, but if you're interested in one or the other more, we're able to tailor that training more towards that. We haven't yet had a community do a bike audit, mock bike audit, something we could entertain, but just understand that the main points of the walk and bike audits are very similar, and so we can use those terms synonymously. So I just wanted to clarify that. So it's also important that we talk about the different types of audits in this training, so that the different people in the room can feel more empowered about what their role might be. So there are government-sanctioned audits, and these are, the engineers, the planners, a mayor, a city council, whomever might say, we really need to do an audit of this particular neighborhood because, one, we're going through a planning process for it, or we've gotten a lot of public outcry that there's an issue here, or maybe we're just systematically going through our neighborhoods and doing this. And those typically, are led then by a professional in that community, but we also encourage that they involve citizens as well. Then there's the citizen-led audit, and this I've seen a lot of in Ohio, is where you have a very outspoken community group who says, we see an issue. Either we are the PTO of a particular school and our kids are having a real hard time walking safely to and from school and we want to do something about it, or we're an older adult group that lives in this apartment building and we can't cross the street safely to get to the bus stop. And so these can be led by the citizens themselves, but we want to also be able to work with them if possible so that they can then use that information that they collect to actually make some change and know where the appropriate outlets are to give that information. So there are different types of audits as well, and this goes hand in hand with the different motivation of them. So we have everything from the more technical audit itself, which would be an engineer's dream. You'd be out there measuring things and collecting data with speed cameras or whatever you might do, and it would be a very detailed technical document that then could be probably very directly translated into a capital improvement program or a plan itself, and then going all the way over to the spectrum of a community assessment, which would be more citizen-led. There are a lot of examples out there for this, but you don't have to be a statistician to make an assessment checklist. You could just go out with your neighbors and check boxes and take pictures of what you see. But understanding that there definitely is a difference between the two of how you can then use that information to move forward. With assessments, a lot of times follow-up inventorying is needed. With the technical audits, that usually covers a lot of the work at the get-go. So we also go through in the training some different online tools and resources that could be useful, and we're able to poke around through them while we're sitting there together during the workshop. But understanding that sometimes a community wants a little bit more of guidance of, why are we doing this audit? Our neighbors have told us it's important, but we want a little bit of data to back it up. Or it could be more of, we've heard that the walk score for our neighborhood is really low. Let's take a look at this. Let's see where in our neighborhood it actually is the lowest, and then do an audit there to see how we can improve that walk score. Looking at the fact that there's so much more data that's crowdsourced available to us now, like through Strava data, to be able to see where people are going and coming from, and being able to then fill in those gaps to hopefully see people using our other roads for biking or walking. And then different tools that are out there, like with FHWA's guide for creating safer communities. There's just a bunch of different information out there. And after the workshop, we actually send out additional information to the group based on what they ask for. And so we're able to send more links, reports, data sources, what have you, that are really tailored to what that particular group of attendees was interested in receiving. So we make sure to talk with the group about what would you be looking for when you're out there doing an audit or an assessment. So the different things are listed here below, and I've talked about them when we were going through the benefits and challenges of walking and biking. So we would do everything from looking at infrastructure issues to, and this is, a lot of that very technical stuff, which goes on a spectrum of, are you out there actually counting the time that it takes for someone to cross the street, or are you measuring the sidewalks, or are you out there taking pictures, seeing how it feels? So is it quantitative, is it qualitative data? It can be anywhere on that spectrum, just depends on what your community is looking for. But understanding that that is a very basic and main component of an audit. You're out there also looking at the behavior of all road users. So not just the people on bikes, not just the people pushing baby buggies, but also the trucks, the buses, the cars. What are the environmental and social issues? So some of this stuff involves, could involve looking at data beforehand, looking at land use maps, looking at crime rates, but there's also a big opportunity to go out there on your feet or on your wheels and take a look at it from that perspective of, looking at a map of land use. It may not seem uncomfortable that there is a big box store next to a school, but when you're out there, it feels a little bit weird. So things like that are something that you can see during an audit that you wouldn't necessarily be able to see by looking at a map. And then perception issues. It's all about perception, really. So this is also another reason why we urge that people who are organizing these audits involve as many different types of participants as possible, because different groups of people perceive things differently, and we don't know unless they're there to tell us their experience. So something that we like to do is we show a long thread of these types of images by saying, you know, when we're out there doing this walk audit, we're going to be looking for certain things. If you're looking at these photos just for face value, you might be thinking, well, I don't see anything wrong. Well, there's a tripping hazard. This is something that you would be looking at during an audit. There's a fence, a gate that's open. You don't know what's behind it. And now, there's not necessarily anything you could do about this, but it's still important to note that this is a perceived challenge to walking through this area. And then there's, you know, it's not always infrastructure that's crumbling and people's behaviors of leaving their gates open that is a challenge. It could also be where you know, the community suggests that people put their recycle bins, or it could be the fact that people put them there because they aren't told to put them on the street. You know, these are different examples of things to think about. So we talk a lot about potential partners and different data sources, and we actually walk through an activity to plan a walk or bike audit in your community. And so this is where it gets to be real specific about that community that is participating in the workshop. A lot of times this results in actually start to planning a real walk or bike audit. And I think that's helpful for people to actually think about how to apply this information to their community in general. And it's a great way then to release them from the workshop and say, you know, your homework is to go out and actually conduct a walk or bike audit. And so we talk about different potential partners and understanding that this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a great start. And a lot of times people bring up different partners that are very specific to a community. Is there a company that could be a great partner because they have a huge presence both physically and financially? Is there a particular council member that really isn't into walking and biking? Maybe they should participate. And so we talk about a lot of that. Also with data sources, understanding, again, if you're doing a more technical audit, you probably want to collect a lot of this information ahead of time. It could also help inform where you're doing the walk or bike audit. You can't cover your entire community in one day, nor could you probably cover it in one season, but you could use the data to hone in on exactly where you want to focus that work. So we also talk about when you're hosting and organizing this audit, it's important to assign roles to people, and this gives people purpose, but it also ensures that you're getting all of the information that you actually need. And so you have someone who's a navigator. I usually suggest that this be the person that organized it because they kind of know what's going on the most. There's a safety lead, and so this is the person that is focusing on documenting all those different environmental factors and safety issues. There's someone who's focusing on infrastructure, so the sidewalks, the crosswalk conditions, the road width, the lighting, etc. There is someone, at least one person, who's taking notes and actually making sure that all of these little comments are being collected. And so if you have a larger group participating, there could be more than one recorder, but it's important to have someone to document all of that. And then a second recorder who's taking pictures and video. So photos, say 1,000 words, so it's really important to have those, and then those can also be associated with a map in the end. So if you have people that are more visual, that's helpful as well. So there are going to be supplies that your community needs for this. So we talk about the bare bones minimum supplies that you would need. And we provide examples of these as well during the training. And so there's some sort of checklist or a form, which again could be very technical, or it could be more of the assessment type that's more qualitative. And There's also a need for a map so that people understand where exactly we're going, but then also to be able to take notes on that map. Safety equipment is a necessity. I cannot emphasize this enough. You kind of feel like a dweeb out there with your fluorescent yellow safety vest on, but it's really important just to be safe in general. But then also it tends to elicit some interest from the people that are out and about in the community, and they might say, "What are you doing?" And then you can talk to them. You can get their perception. Maybe you'll get a new advocate. And then a camera or a recording device. This could be a point and shoot camera. It could be a GoPro. It could be your iPhone. Whatever it is, just something that can take pictures. And then, of course, if you're doing a bike audit, you need bikes. You need helmets, things like that. But those are more details that we get into for your particular workshop. So there's an example of more of a community assessment type checklist. There's me in my safety vest. And then there's the most common recording device around these days. So then, because it is so important to learn by doing, we actually get out on the street in the community where we're holding the workshop. So this takes a little bit of pre-preparation with whoever's organizing this workshop with me, to be able to pick where we're going to go near the training location and exactly what type of audit we want to do. Do we want to do a more technical? Do we want to do more of an assessment? Something in between? Is there a point of contention? Do we want to make this be a truthful audit, or do we just want to make it be an exercise in understanding what it might be like to get out there, knowing that we aren't going to be as detailed as we would be when you're actually doing it with your community? So we also emphasize that it's really important to have some guidelines about how to do the audit and how to instruct the people who are participating. So making sure to follow all traffic laws is really important. Just because you feel empowered with your fluorescent yellow vest and you're there as a part of the community doing this for the community, it doesn't mean that you can just walk out in the middle of the street or cross without a signal. Make sure to keep the group together. This can tend to be a challenge depending on who you're involving. Different age groups, that can be a struggle with different paces of walking. If you are doing a bike audit and some people are more comfortable on bikes than others, still wait for the stragglers. And then, of course, if there are, is there inclement weather or something like that, you can run into this as well. Getting back to the whole idea of talking to people along the route, you don't have to look a different way. Use that vest to feel empowered in this case and actually talk to people about what their experience is. And then we suggest that people score each segment of the walk. And so when you make your map, and we'll talk about this more at the workshop, is we segment it so that there are natural breaking points where everyone can stop, regroup, talk about what they just experienced, but then also give a score to that segment. And this helps in the end when you're looking back through all the data to say, oh yeah, in general, it was pretty good. I mean, our neighborhood that we walked around felt pretty safe for walking and biking. But then they say, oh, segment 2, that was real bad. And then, you can remember that and have a way to focus more in on it. And then talking with the group about different ideas as you go. What kind of programming or projects or policies could you initiate that would actually improve the scores of those segments? And then this is a great way to start talking about implementation. Like, what do we do with this information once we're done with the audit? So then again, after the audit, we go through this in the workshop. We do the mock audit, then we come back and we debrief, and we set out a little schedule of what would we actually do if this was really happening in our community. Talk as a group about what we experienced. If it's a large group, it may have been broken up into subgroups, and so then each of those needs to share with one another what they experienced. Talking about how do we share this data and information with our partners now. So not everyone in the room is everyone who needs to have this information. Is there a community 311 that needs to know about the broken sidewalks? Is there a funding partner that we want to share this with? Do we need to present this to the Planning Commission? Do we want to talk more with the fire department? Whatever it might be. And then talking about next steps. So for those of us who are planners or planners at heart, it seems to flow naturally. Okay, well, we just did an audit. We have the data. We have quantitative and qualitative information. We know who we're going to talk to. Let's go do it. To others, it isn't quite as natural. So we actually emphasize it's important to work together during that debrief to identify next steps. Who's responsible for what? How are we going to move this forward? What kind of changes do we want to make? Policy, program, project changes. So now that I've given you a little taste of what the workshop is about, just want to share what the full course agenda is. I've alluded to some of this in my remarks, but I think it's just really important for me to reiterate what the 4 hours really entails. So, we want to get into the bones of it, of, why are we even talking about a walking and biking in our community? What are the challenges to it? What are the benefits to it? And then why would we do an audit anyway? But then talking about how to actually lead that audit, and whether you are a community leader, a general member of the public, a mayor, or an engineer, you can lead an audit, or you can partner with someone with technical expertise to lead an audit, and there's no right or wrong way to make that happen. What are the tools and resources available to you? And then, working together through conversation during the workshop about what specific tools and resources might you want. Do you want to know where to get data specifically for your county? Do you want to see some reports out there about best practices in doing walk and bike audits? Do you want to get some information about how to fund the changes that you are going to elicit from the results of your audit? And then we can work together to make sure you get all of those tools and resources sent out to you so that then you can really feel prepared to hold your audit in your community. We do that mock walk audit so that you get out there and feel what it would actually be like. And then we talk about how do you make the change happen? What is your implementation plan?
Amelia, we have a question for you in the chat pod.
Oh, great.
Does ODOT ever initiate one of these audits? Which type of group organization typically requests these based on recent experience?
Well, Victoria, I don't know the question about if ODOT ever initiates them. Do you have any insight in that?
On the walk and bike audits, I haven't been involved with those. I know that we have done roadway audits, but we would be happy, I would think, to help initiate if that's something that was requested by a local community. And we actually happen to have our ped bike coordinators on the webinar with us. I know Caitlin is on here, so I'm going to promote her up as a presenter, and I'm going to unmute her. Let me find her other spot here, and she can also speak to that as well.
Great.
All right, Caitlin, I'm unmuting you. So if you want to jump in there, and then let me see if we still have Jordan on here.
Hello.
Hi. You want to go ahead and take that question?
Yeah, I was just going to say I think it would be, great for our ODOT districts to, work with communities and promote this opportunity and bring in an audit into their district. I think that would be a good role for our district folks.
Yep. And Jordan, I've got you unmuted as well in presenter mode, so if you want to add anything to that. Caitlin Hardley and Jordan Whistler are our two ped bike coordinators here in the state.
Yeah, I think as Victoria said, can people hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep. Victoria mentioned resources for road safety audits, and there's surely an interest on our end to help local communities understand the issues that they're being confronted with, especially as it relates to bikes and pedestrians. So the districts are a really great resource to reach out to. And if there's a location or a corridor of interest after you go through this course and get some training, we're we're absolutely willing and able to help coordinate and facilitate some of these on behalf of your community.
Great. Caitlin, if you want to just mute again, and I'm going to mute, and Amelia, you can keep going. If there's any other questions from the audience, feel free to put them in the chat pod.
To answer the second part of the question about, in my experience, who most often is initiating a walk or bike audit, I think that was the question. I've seen a lot in the past with schools and school districts doing it, and I think that's a big part of the school travel plan, which then leads to the Safe Routes to School funding. So there's an understandable reason there for that. And plus, everyone is interested in children being safe specifically. In the recent years, I've actually seen a lot of them being held by health departments, and so community-based health departments, like the City of Columbus Department of Public Health, for example, was doing a lot of them systematically throughout neighborhoods that were identified as, underserved, having a high percentage of households without cars, or having higher rates of like childhood obesity or things like that, to look at it from that health perspective. So I think that is a great example, because you aren't necessarily in that regard thinking of it from a planning or an engineering perspective. It's more of like, okay, we see an issue, and those are these health factors. How do we change the built environment to change that trend that we see? Also, I've seen it a lot with planning departments, whether it's like an MPO or a city or village or county planning department, knowing that they're going to be doing an update of a plan for their community or their neighborhood. And a great way to engage people in this is to get them out there on the streets, seeing what it is they're planning for. It can be done at the beginning of the process to identify concerns or opportunities, but it also could be done midway or closer to the end as well. So there are a lot of reasons why people are asking for them, and in my experience, mostly. But we are open to working with anyone to help you figure out what would work for your community. You might be wondering, how do I apply for a course? So in one of my opening slides, I was talking about how to navigate through the ODOT webpage to get to it. We'll send out this presentation, and you'll be able to click directly on the link. But again, you can Google ODOT LTAP Active Transportation Academy, and it'll take you right there. And you'll see this course listed. You'll see the other courses listed. You can read a little bit more about them. But you ultimately click on a form, and that is shot over to ODOT, and then we get back to you and let you know next steps. So what we do ask is that you commit to at least 15 participants and have a space that you can offer for the training. With the 4-hour trainings, like with the Walk and Bike Audit, that's really perfect when it comes to logistics, because you don't have to worry about lunch breaks or, do you want to provide coffee or what have you. But, having a place that's easy for people to get to, whether we work in that specific community or if you're inviting people from neighboring communities, what's the easiest time of day for them to get there, things like that. We ask that you consider...
You're getting a little hard to hear there, sorry.
Oh, can you... Well, let me know if that happens again.
Okay.
You can... we ask that you consider thinking about inviting people from adjacent communities as well, not just because that gives us like a bigger bang for our buck, if you will, of having more people at the training, but there are a lot of communities out there that admit that they just have a hard time working with their neighbors, not because they don't want to, but because it's just really hard when you're thinking about your constrained budget and the fact that you have your community that you have to focus on and your residents who are coming to you with their issues and their needs. It's really hard to think about, okay, we're building this sidewalk, and what happens when we get to the jurisdictional line? There's no sidewalk on the other side. So let's, work with that community on the other side to see if they can build their sidewalk as well. So that's an added benefit of reaching out to adjacent communities and other partners. And we are happy to help you with recruiting or coordinating with nearby communities. That is something we love to do. And if you don't know the people in those communities, we probably do. So all that you need to do is sign up through this form. We just ask for basic information. What course are you interested in? When would you like to have it? And a few other contact information items. But then we reach back out to you and fill in the gaps with all of these different logistical bits. But our team does most of the heavy lifting. We just ask that you show up and bring at least 14 of your closest friends. So with that, I have finished my my talk and happy to entertain other questions. Otherwise, I hope that we get a bunch of interest in the coming weeks from you for this training.
Thanks, Amelia. And we can still take questions in the chat pod, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone on my end. So that means that if your phone line is currently muted, you can unmute it on your end as well. I'm going to go through and unmute those who are showing as muted on the screen in the attendee section, so you can ask questions directly of Amelia if you'd like. While we're doing that, also feel free to type in some questions in the chat pod if you'd like. Well, so far it looks like you did a great job because there's not a ton of questions coming in.
Oh, the questions will come later. I'm sure I'll be getting emails.
Yeah, and Amelia's email address is there on the screen as well, and as she mentioned, we'll be sending the PowerPoint presentation out to everyone afterwards with hopefully a link to the recording too, because I know a few of you had some issues at the very beginning being able to log into the webinar. I'm glad we were able to get you in. Sometimes I understand that Outlook or the email system changes a character or two in the link when it goes through, and that caused a few issues. I know we've got one person that's still typing in the chat pod, so here's the question. How would local community advocates find out about this program, especially communities who have not participated in Safe Routes to School? And I think that might be a question for Kate or Jordan, so I'm going to make sure they're unmuted as well.
Did you say
unmuted
Kate?
you. We can hear you.
Perfect. I think that there's a couple ways we can promote this through some of our different active transportation networks. I think also providing this information to MPOs and RTPOs who have good connections with local communities and provide technical assistance to them. This might be a good resource for them to be able to pass along as well. And then I was also thinking, our safe routes or bike ped contacts at the districts could help get the word out about some of these free trainings. And then I know that we've also promoted this through booths at conferences, all types of cross-sector conferences, health conferences, school conferences, making sure that some of those non-traditional partners or kind of cross-sector partners are aware of these types of trainings as well.
Thank you. And we have another question that came into the chat pod. Will you touch on audits for specifically professionals? The City of Columbus does engineer-specific bike rides in the community.
So we can absolutely tailor the workshop to be more technically focused. That's not a problem. But I do know that there are some programs out there, like you're mentioning with the engineers going on bike audits, and I'm going to defer to Caitlin or Jordan to talk a little bit more about that. I don't know where that program stands currently, but I do know that it was quite the experience for those engineers participating and something that it really had an impact.
Mm-hmm. In terms of professional development rides, we are considering kind of how we can fund those in the future right now. But I would say Amelia, I think that this training is definitely something that could be geared towards city professionals looking to kind of gain skills around hosting those walk and bike audits with partners, stakeholders, or, community partners as well. If that answers the question.
Hopefully it does. And just to mention, we are able through LTAP to offer AICP credits for many of these trainings, including the one that's being covered today. The person who asked the question said, thanks, that was good. So we only have about 5 minutes left, so if there are any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat pod.
And then I was just following
Great.
up on the question and sort of was interested in hearing from the audience if there were any ideas for us about how we could promote these resources, or if there's a channel of promotion that we're missing that you think would be important, or an audience.
I'm hoping we get lots of input on that question. Maybe they want to think about it a little bit. I mean, we're always happy to take emails too, or give us a call after the webinar. We did have a comment here. It says, I wasn't able to join the slideshow until the session had been underway for a while. Can the slideshow be shared? Absolutely. We will definitely be emailing out not only the presentation file as a PDF, but also we will hopefully have a link to a recording of the presentation that we'll send you out as well. Once I'm able to convert that over and post it to our YouTube site hopefully later today. So, okay, well, we only have a few minutes left here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate very much, Amelia, your efforts in getting this all put together for us, and Caitlin and Jordan, me putting you on the spot like that. Thank you so much for pitch hitting and jumping in there. You guys are always wonderful. So, anything anyone else would like to add before we wrap up? Nope. Okay. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to hosting you on future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.